Hi, this is Scott Pierce. This seminar covers crossover questions, and if you're doing this material in the order I present it, this will be our final seminar together. And the good news is, there's no new law to learn here. Oh, sure, we may cover a few issues that we haven't looked at before, but we're not trying to figure out how to invent the wheel for any new subject. Crossover questions, by their nature, are covering more than one subject, and we've already seen plenty of questions in our work together where the examiners are focusing our attention on more than one subject. We already know, for example, that criminal law and procedure are tested together very regularly. Similarly, we have seen that torts and contracts and real property often have interlocking issues that lend themselves to being tested simultaneously. And of course, we've seen that remedies is omnipresent. Remedies can be present in torts, contracts, real property, a straight remedies question, corporations, wills and trusts, community property, even professional responsibility can present some crossover issues to remedies. So here, what we will look at will be questions involving more than one subject, often with the subjects being tested separately. And here we see once again just how centrally important it is to begin our focus on any given essay question by looking at the cause of the question. It is very common for crossover questions to be more or less indicated with a bright red flag right at the call of the question. So if we get a couple of calls that ask about civil remedies and another question that asks about civil procedure, we're not going to waste an awful lot of time trying to deduce what is being tested. We will know from the call of the question. Similarly, we have seen how the examiners tend to use coded language right in the calls of the question to give test takers valuable clues about just exactly what they are looking for. And in this seminar, we're going to see all of those skills come to the fore over and over again. So I would say that the primary skill that we will be working on together in this seminar is organization. The black letter law is not going to be anything new here. We've seen all of the subjects, but what we haven't seen in depth is how the subjects can be tested together. So, again, we will start, as we always do, by looking at the call of the question, both to try to figure out what is being tested and to try to figure out, to the extent the calls will allow us to figure it out, what possible sub-issues are present. Then, as we read the fact pattern, once again, we will be carefully trying to pay attention to which paragraphs go to subject A and which to subject B. What I think makes crossover questions easier than in-depth questions about specific subjects is, by their nature, crossover questions tend to be fairly superficial. Crossover questions are testing your ability to avoid panic, to focus carefully on what is being asked, and then to give specific, insightful answers which are sensitive to the facts and which show a clear knowledge of the body of law that is at issue. So, very briefly, take a look at the crossover approach that I present. This has about as little to do with the actual bar exam as any of these approaches. This is more an approach that wraps up what we've talked about before. Basically, what we are trying to do here is figure out what is being tested and then organize our answer in the most responsive way. So, rather than present some sort of separate crossover checklist, the basic idea is start with the call of the question. Do what we always do, organize our answer around the call. Then, when we are having a little bit more difficulty figuring out exactly what's at issue, then we take a step back. We resort to the approach that we have for each individual subject, and then try to see what the question is inquiring about, see where it fits on that checklist. Then, as always, we break the issues down to pieces, we connect the facts to the specific pieces, and we reach narrow, specific conclusions that are related to our earlier analysis. So, once again, the basic job is spot the issues, break them into elements, connect the facts to the elements, and then finally, present narrow, specific answers to the calls of the question that show an understanding of how the facts and the law relate to one another to create a specific result. Here, in crossover questions, we will again see a fair commonality of language, occasionally at least, between the essay questions and the multi-state bar examination. Then, finally, I wrap up this approach by commenting about an issue that relates to general preparation on the bar examination. Many people don't do this seminar on crossovers until very close to the exam itself. Others will do part of this seminar fairly early, maybe as early as June or December, and then finish the seminar closer to the exam. But I do have one idea for you that I want to mention here, and that deals with short-term memory. I have emphasized over and over again in this class just what a bad idea it is to recite boilerplate. At the same time, you do have to know a great deal of law to be able to organize your answers and to be able to apply the law to the facts in a given question. So, how do you go about memorizing this law? Both I and the experts at PMBR agree that one of the best ways to learn the law is by doing a lot of multi-state questions. And I think you've seen in your essay work that reviewing a lot of essay questions is another really good way to learn about what the law is, and maybe equally important, to learn how the bar examiners test that law. So when it boils down to the last couple of weeks before the exam, then we're in an area where short-term memory actually means something. I think it's a dreadful error to spend a lot of time trying to memorize the law in the first couple of months of practice. But I do think that during the last couple of weeks, and especially during the last week or 10 days, actual short-term memory work can count for something. The way to do it is, again, try to identify the areas that you are weakest at. Don't memorize the stuff you already know. That's not going to give you extra points on the exam. But during the last couple of weeks, especially during the last week, short-term memory means something, and you can stuff a lot of ideas into short-term memory and be confident that they will stay there long enough to be worth something on the exam. So, I think it's worth your time to review all of the essay questions that you've done in practice, to identify those issues that you missed, and to make sure you understand them, number one, well enough to spot them, and number two, well enough to be able to give a meaningful answer that shows that you appreciate the issues involved. So, that's basically it. We're ready to go over a bunch of crossover questions. I think you'll find them to be informative, and to the extent any of this stuff ever is interesting, you'll find it to be interesting too.